Today I'm joined by Tim Patton again, and he's going to ask me which intellectual I think is the least bad. So why don't we go ahead and get started, Tim?
So, one of the long running conversations you and I have in private is which intellectual is worst? For example, Murray Rothbard or someone like Slavoj Zizek, or Murray Rothbard or someone like Lou Rockwell. And then within the libertarians and within the social conservatives, who exactly do you like better or who is less bad? Because to a certain extent, no one's per se perfect. Um, so we're going to start off with Mr. Libertarian himself, and we're going to compare him to a list of libertarians. And I picked about 25 intellectuals, and we're going to go through each one of them. So the libertarians I've included are Sean Gabb, Hans Hoppe, Ron Paul, Lou Rockwell, Tom Woods, David Friedman, Michael Malice, Ayn Rand. I could have picked more, I could have picked less, but I think it's a good broad overview of some of the more liberal libertarians and some of the more conservative libertarians, and of course the objectivists as well. So of Rothbard, who would you rather? Would you rather him over Hans Hoppe, or would you rather him over Lou Rockwell, and so forth?
Ooh, well, let's start with the Triple H. I'd pick Rothbard.
Hands down.
Yeah,
And
yeah, there was, you see, maybe it's because Rothbard was a Jew, but he could laugh at himself. I feel like Triple H is too stuck up his own backside. Like, I feel like with Rothbard, you'd be like, once you're done talking politics, you can just kind of, mingle.
who do you think has more influence between Hoppe and Rothbard? I mean, this is a classic debate within libertarian circles. You have the Rothbardians and the Hoppians. They've actually started to find find their disagreements over who do you think will have a longer influence. Murray has a huge influence. I mean, through Lou Rockwell, through Ron Paul. I mean, and Pat Buchanan as well. Um,
I think Murray Rothbard is going to have a broader influence because, okay, if you look at the libertarians, there's the right and left libertarians, and we already mentioned this and how Walter Block pretends he's plumb-line when he's really a right libertarian. Um, but both right and left libertarians want to claim Murray Rothbard. So you can think of the C4SS types, or a classic left libertarian would be, no, I can't think of his name.
Jeffrey Tucker.
Well, Jeffrey Tucker's one of them, yeah. But Roderick T. Long is more sort of classic, or Sheldon Richmond.
Yeah.
These are left libertarians, but they consider Murray Rothbard one of their own, and they like to quote Murray Rothbard when he says that liberals seek liberal ends with conservative means, whereas libertarians seek liberal ends with liberal means, i.e. the liberals want to use the power of the state to achieve liberal ends, which Rothbard sees as a reactionary position. And that was what he said in the 70s, 60s and 70s, and probably early 80s. And then in the mid to late 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, he takes on the more right-wing hat. And then, of course, he dies like in 2002. So Hoppe, rather, is more narrowly right libertarian, right out of the gate. And so he's already sort of limited himself that way. I'm not saying that's a bad thing per se, but as far as who are you going to influence, Murray Rothbard sort of transcends right and left in the sense that he also transcends libertarianism, because paleo-conservatives who aren't even necessarily libertarian like Murray Rothbard. And there are people on the left, like, say, Keith Preston, who's an anarchist and not necessarily a libertarian, who also likes Murray Rothbard. So I think Murray Rothbard is going to have the greater. I think he's going to win on two grounds. One, he's a person you want to have, dinner and a drink with. And two, he's the kind of person who's going to have a longer lasting intellectual impact.
About Rothbard versus Rand. Ayn Rand.
Now, that's an interesting matchup. When it comes to personality, Rothbard hands down. When it comes to a philosophy, Ayn Rand. Nap libertarianism is, I think, prima facie ridiculous. I've pretty much destroyed the nap twice. Whereas Ayn Rand's egoism is not prima facie ridiculous. egoism is an established philosophical school of thought, going back to at least Max Stirner. And Ayn Rand is a somewhat, I mean, again, she's a lightweight philosopher compared to the heavyweights like, Nietzsche, Hegel, Locke, Hume. But compared to like free market philosophers, she's probably one of the best.
And and one thing is, her fiction will live on a long time. I mean, Atlas Shrugged. There was a survey in 1970s where it was like the second most read book in the United States. So of the rest of the libertarians, they're more minor libertarians. Who would you rather over Rothbard? Actually, I'll have to include another big one: David Friedman versus Rothbard. David Friedman, consequentialist libertarian. He's more socially liberal in a lot of ways. He floats in more circles. I think I've seen him at PorcFest. C4. You could see C4SS referencing him in the Machinery of Freedom. He's not, in that regard, he's not a social conservative at all. But Rothbard versus David Friedman, influence, character, and where you fit in on your own intellectual model.
Well, I think David Friedman is probably the greatest libertarian philosopher of the 20th century. David Friedman doesn't have a nice a priori shiny theory like Rothbard, doesn't have a well-developed cult like Ayn Rand, but what I respect about David Friedman is he sees the world he tries to look at the world the way it really is. And when he admits defense is a hard question, and he tries to give probabilistic, rational choice explanations for solving these problems. Whereas beginning with Rothbard, there's this kind of inherent utopianism in libertarian thinking where, well, it's called, instead of within Christian apologetics, atheists always complain of God of the gaps. Oh, well, you bring up God when you can't explain something. Well, there's a kind of free market of the gaps for libertarianism where we don't know how the free market's going to explain it, but we know that it will. It almost certainly will. Whereas David Friedman doesn't really rely on those cheap excuses. And of course, Rand is a bit different entirely in that she's not an anarchist at all. She actually does believe in a state. And so for her, those aren't really problems at all because, free riders, we got the state. National defense, we got the state. So Rand probably has the best out of all the possible explanations as far as realistic. But amongst like anarcho-capitalists, David Friedman, hands down. I think he has much better explanations on average. Doesn't mean I agree with some of them are kind of, to be honest, a little goofy, like tipping. That was what he mentioned in the Machinery of Freedom. You're going to fund national defense via tipping? I don't think so. But I've talked to him a couple times. He's a very approachable person, a very, convivial person. He doesn't seem like I've talked to a lot of libertarians in my day, and most of them think that they're better than you. David Friedman doesn't seem to think that he's better than you.
Libertarians in that regard often remind me of, maybe this is maybe just superficial, but often remind me of the Marxists. And actually, it's not totally out of hand to say libertarianism is a form of intellectual, is more of rooted from a priori suppositions and stuff like that. So of the rest of Ron Paul, Lou Rockwell, Tom Woods, who would you rather, Rothbard versus those three?
Versus Ron Paul, I'm probably going to pick Ron Paul. He's, socially conservative, really nice guy. It's not clear if he's actually an anarchist at all. He might be a minarchist, which means he's going to have a more realistic solution. Generally, I'm going to pick Ron Paul. Tom Woods, I'm going to probably pick Tom Woods. And I'm slightly biased because at one point I was censored on the Mises website, and Tom Woods came to bat for me. So I'm a little biased in favor of Tom. He helped me out when I got censored by the libertarians. Lou. I'm going to go with Murray. I mean, Lou's a sellout. I mean, the Triple R, I don't know how you walk that back. I mean, Lou Rockwell literally wrote that he was happy that the cops beat up Rodney King after he was arrested as a sign to all other criminals that if you get out of line, this is what you can expect. I mean, he was like Law and Order to the hilt. And now he's like, oh, libertarianism is racially inclusive now. I'm like, what? You're a sellout, dude.
Sean Gabb.
Um, Rothbard. I'm gonna
Rothbard
go with
versus Sean
Rothbard
Gabb.
again. For many of the same reasons with the other libertarians, they tend to think they're better than you. They tend to be.
So that's gonna be Rothbard.
Rothbard wins most of these matchups. The only ones in which he doesn't would be Ayn Rand, David Friedman, Ron Paul, and Tom Woods. On all the other matchups you gave me, Rothbard easily wins.
Including Malice.
Oh, right. I don't know much about Malice. I can't really say.
Okay, well, I'll put Rothbard. Rothbard's more influential than Malice. So I'll just put him. All right, so the
Again,
next.
I don't know Malice very well, but I would probably guess Rothbard.
So we're gonna skip down to the Rothbard. Just to, do the ones that he's more close to. I grouped a group of social conservatives. So Rothbard versus what social conservatives say. So Ann Coulter, Paul Gottfried, Peter Hitchens, Pat Buchanan, and Victor Hansen. Of those group.
Well, it's funny that you'd pick it because Ann Coulter. She's one of the only female commentators on the right who I don't consider a thought. And the reason is about 10 years ago, she said that the problem with the current democratic system is that women vote. And if women didn't vote, then the Democratic Party just wouldn't be a thing, at least not in its current form. And I was like, wow, like that anybody would say that was incredible. So I have a lot of respect for Ann Coulter in that regard.
Does it have enough to get over the hill that is Murray Rothbard?
Yeah, because, Murray Rothbard was pretty based in the Triple R. He would have agreed, and then some. So I think Rothbard still wins, but Ann Coulter gives a good showing.
Okay, Rothbard versus Gottfried.
No, Gottfried. I've actually talked to Gottfried. He's a pretty nice guy. Okay, as far as influence, again, Rothbard's probably going to win. But I would probably pick, personally, Gottfried over Rothbard because I agree with Paul Gottfried more. And I don't really know. I mean, I know Paul Gottfriid somewhat personally. I've talked to him before. And he seems like a fairly nice guy. He doesn't think he's better than you, like a lot of intellectuals do. So, yeah, in the realm of influence, Rothbard, but otherwise I'd go with Paul Gottfried. Now, as far as influence, Ann Coulter wins hands down because she's got a much bigger soapbox than Murray Rothbard.
Peter Hitchens.
I think he does win. Not by a large margin, but in most of these areas, I think he does win. He's a pretty well-known conservative spokesman. Again, there's a level of... now, again, Rothbard isn't so much stuck on himself. He can laugh at himself. That's what I think I and other people like about Rothbard, is he can sort of laugh at himself. But I'm going to go with Peter on this one. I think Peter's going to edge out, at least for me.
Pat Buchanan.
Oh, yeah, the Pattinator, definitely.
That's easy chance.
Easy, man. Pat Buchanan.
And then lastly, Victor David Hansen.
Ooh, back in the day, I was really down on Hansen, and I still kind of am. But as far as his basic thesis of culture, even if I think he overstates it, I think Hansen's basically right. So looking back at it, I would probably agree with Hansen in the general, but contest the particulars. Because again, he's famous for Culture and Carnage and his sort of cultural view of success. So as far as influence, he was extremely influential because he hitched his wagon to the neocons, which makes him a sellout, obviously. But he's influential. So he wins the influence game, but he's a sellout. Murray Rothbard isn't a sellout, so he wins that one. Who would I rather hang out with? Probably Murray Rothbard, because I get the feeling that if you argued with Victor Davis Hansen on the Civil War or World War II, he'd just call you a Nazi. And I feel like, Murray Rothbard wouldn't do that. So I think Murray's going to win this one.
All right, now I have the third category, the eccentrics. It's like Nassim Taleb versus Murray Rothbard. Nassim Taleb's sort of become increasingly famous since like 2007 with his book Black Swan and Fooled by Randomness. He wrote a fairly wide-ranging, circulating on the internet, the minority rules, Um, um, what would you say? Nassim Taleb versus Murray
Influence is
Rothbard?
going to go to Nassim Taleb. As a recognized social scientist, he's got a lot of influence. As a person, I'd probably pick Rothbard. From what I've seen of Taleb, he's one of those I'm better than you intellectuals. Um, and so, yeah, as far as influence, probably going to go to Nassim Taleb. As far as who I don't know what Nassim Taleb's like social views are, so I can't judge him on that. But as a person, I'd pick Rothbard.
So you're
So,
gonna pick Rothbard?
yeah.
Next up, Neil Ferguson, author of Pity War. Pity War is one of the more interesting books out there because Neil Ferguson's a mainstream historian who writes a revisionist history of World War One, which is kind of surprising because once you start attacking World War One, and he also wrote 20th Century Conflict and the Six Killer Apps of Western Civilization, um, and he's done it on the platform as a mainstream historian. I'm not sure if he worked at Harvard, but I know he's been on major institutions, so he's not like Rothbard. Rothbard or Hoppe and a lot of these libertarians never had an institutional platform like a Ferguson does. So where would Ferguson go in Rothbard versus
Oof.
Ferguson?
I'm going to go with Ferguson. Ferguson wins on influence. Also, even if I don't think Ferguson is critical enough, the fact that he would even revise World War One at all in this current environment is, I think, quite heroic. Like that he would even do that at all when nobody else would or had. I'm like, yeah, give the guy props for what he's done.
Yeah, the Pity of War is an incredible book. I mean, you can find that in like mainstream libraries, and it basically attacks both the British liberal war establishment in 1914, called it a mistake.
He
So it's
also
just
continues that argument in his book series, War of the World.
mhm.
He even tries to revise World War II. Now, he does double down at the end. You know, Hitler was the ultimate baddie, which, again, is one of the most overrated baddies in history. But he's even beginning to risk challenging the World War II narrative, even if it's somewhat tepid, even if it doesn't go as far as I'd like. The fact that a mainstream historian would do that is, I think, encouraging. And furthermore, as a person, he is socially conservative. And I forget what those YouTube videos are. And they're not TED Talks, but they have like 5-minute interviews with intellectuals.
Mm-hmm.
He was on there and he said that he's culturally Christian, that Jesus Christ gave the best moral commands of any teacher in history. So, yeah, I'm going to go hands down with him on this one, Niall Ferguson.
Next up, Graham Hancock. I like Graham Hancock for a variety of reasons. First of all, he had a great interview with Joe Rogan. His book, Magicians of the Gods. I'm not sure if he was on the show Ancient Aliens, but he would fit right in. He's put in a lot of eccentric theories. He sort of injected a lot of eccentric theories into the mainstream discourse. If you go back and start figuring out who was the first one to say this in the last 30 years, it would tend to be Graham Hancock. He pushes the pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. He talks about Atlantis. He talks about all sorts of crazy things all at once. But I like the guy Graham Hancock. I think he's one of the most interesting people out there currently. Even though some of his theories might be kooky. What would you think? I included him. I don't know if he deserves to be included, but
Well, Graham Hancock kind of reminds me of Eric von Däniken, Chariot of the Gods fame. As far as influence, they're
it has to
both
be Murray.
they're both friends, but yeah, Murray's probably going to win.
Yeah.
As far as who'd be fun to hang around, they're both probably going to be really fun, either one. So I think Murray wins, but only because he's more influential.
I've never heard Graham Hancock speak or had something written and not be bored of it. So that's a huge.
Oh yeah, and I'm not necessarily dissing here at Graham Hancock. I'm just saying that probably Murray wins this one.
Jared Diamond, your favorite.
No, man, is that even a question? I mean, this guy is such a joke. I mean, like, no. It's look, if geography determined everything, then why is Hong Kong a powerhouse? Rothbard. Move on. Next one.
Zizek.
Oh. I know this is going to be a little off, but I think I'm going to go with Zizek on this one.
Why?
I picked Zizek because, one, he, like Rothbard, Zizek can appeal to both sides of the aisle, especially recently. Zizek has been appealing to a lot of... He got his bona fides as a left-wing commentator, and one of the few that I found interesting. But he's also been able to cross over with conservatives, like his amazing discussion with Jordan Peterson. That thing was just so amazing. And he's kind of like so crazy that you kind of go through the looking glass. Like, he says something that's on the face of it nonsense, but he gets your attention. And then you follow his argument all the way through, and then there's this gradual realization that he's kind of right, and it freaks you out.
Zizek also has an interesting life story, because he was born in the Soviet Union. I give that props, because I always have a sort of suspicion of any person who advocates state Marxism, who grew up in the United States. That's just, but the fact that he grew up in Slovenia in like the 1980s and 70s, and now he's advocating. That's actually a really socially conservative thing to do, to say that. In that regard, and some of his works like Freedom of First Choice are sort of incredible. So next up, Tyler Cowen. Tyler Cowen tends to piss off the sort of Misesian libertarians, because he's more of a statist in their regards. But Tyler Cowen has a lot of interesting conversations with various people. Conversations with Tyler. I've followed Tyler Cowen probably since 2010. I first heard him on Russ Roberts' podcast. He's a GM, and he's more of a GMU libertarian. He's also interviewed Paul Krugman, and they came to a lot of agreements. And again, a thing with Tyler Cowen is he has, like Ferguson, he has mainstream influence. Thomas Friedman, I think the author of the New York Times, he's friends with Tyler Cowen, and oftentimes he'll cite him as a source. So that's something that most of the people on this list have no access to the New York Times. Not that's the good thing or anything, but on influence, Tyler Cowen has a big influence there. So what would you pick, Tyler Cowen or?
Well, I'm going to pick Rothbard only because I don't know hardly anything about Tyler Cowen. If I knew more, I could give a more informed decision. But if you're going to force me to pick, I'll pick Rothbard, but with the big caveat that...
Okay.
Yeah.
Thad Russell? Author of Renegade History of the United States.
I mean, this isn't even a question.
Guest on
Murray Rothbard.
Okay. Christopher Hitchens versus Rothbard.
Influence probably goes to Chris, but everything else I'd want to hang out with Rothbard.
All right, and last.
I mean, Christopher Hitchens is the definition of a guy who gets high smelling his own farts.
There you go.
I mean, that's Chris Hitchens is the definition of that.
All right, now the fun ones begin. Noam Chomsky.
I'm still going to go with Murray Rothbard on this. Okay, influence would go to Noam Chomsky. I mean, he's broken through to mainstream. I mean, Vox will post Chomskyite material or derivatives thereof. So he's probably more influential than Murray Rothbard. They're both highly specialized Jewish economists, or so at least wannabe economists. But I'm probably going to go with Murray as far as agreeing with him more personally, and then also on the level of just, do you want to hang out with Murray?
Murray Rothbard versus Richard Pipes.
Influence goes to Pipes. I don't know a lot about Pipes, but...
what you do know about you like.
I do. So I'd probably pick Pipes, because to talk to him would be a very interesting conversation.
And last but not least, I've cut a few out, but Moldbug.
Oh, it's not even a question. Murray Rothbard.
Okay. All right. Next up, so we'll skip around a little bit, but we'll do Neil Ferguson versus the Field, because I sort of want to get you on those answers first here.
Wait, Niall Ferguson versus who?
Versus everyone else. 1 second. Neil Ferguson versus the Libertarians. So first up.
Well, I mean, except for David Friedman, I don't think anybody's even close to being in his league.
Why do you say that?
This is gonna make a lot of people angry, but a lot of these reasons why these fringe. Okay, there's two reasons why libertarians with a more radical variety are fringe. One is because they advocate a system that's very far outside the Overton window. Fair enough, and you can't expect them to be. You can't expect the red carpet rolled out for them if you're doing that. But a lot of these people are just not credible intellectuals. You see, if you only hang around libertarians, Rothbard, Hoppe, Kinsella, Block, the rest of them, they all look really good. But this is one of the things that I begrudgingly have to admit about the academy having gone through college is, well, yeah, there's a lot of favoritism, there's a lot of progressive BS, and there's a lot of denying of reality. There's a level of quality control that the academy still has that online libertarians don't.
And so you would say you would take Neil Ferguson over all the libertarians,
Except David.
except David. Ferguson beats Friedman, except Ferguson beats Rand, Malice, Woods, Rockwell, Gabb, and Paul. And Triple
Oh,
H,
you know
of
what?
course.
You mentioned the other guy you mentioned might also be on that one too. Who was it? Rand. Yeah, Rand as well would make the cut. So Rand and David would be the only two who I would put in the same league as
So
Niall
Ferguson.
Ferguson.
So let's just go through this. Ferguson versus Rothbard. You take Ferguson.
Yep.
Ferguson versus Gabb, Paul, Rockwell, Woods. You take Ferguson.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ferguson versus Friedman. You take Friedman.
Well, I'd say it's more of a tie. The reason I'd say that is, well, one's an economist and one's a historian. In their areas of expertise, they've shown a comparable level of mastery. There's a comparable level of mastery demonstrated in their field. So obviously, Niall Ferguson does integrate economics into history. So, for example, in his documentary series based off his book, The History of Wealth, he does do that. And he points out, he makes some interesting observations, especially about the Civil War and how the real turning point for the South was losing the Battle of New Orleans when they couldn't sell cotton back to France. Yeah, so very interesting guy. And he actually integrates economics into history to a degree, I think, far better than libertarians do.
But you would take Rand and Friedman over Ferguson?
Not over. Again, I think these three are like
tie.
Tie.
Ooh. Okay, I'll put tie next to it.
Tie. If I really, really, really had to pick, I'd probably pick Ferguson. But I think it's like shaving hairs at that point.
So let's say you had Machinery, Freedom, and Pity of War. You only read one of those books.
Pity of War, easy.
Okay. So then that's Ferguson. And
Ferguson, yeah.
Same
Ferguson
would be Atlas Shrugged as well. Atlas Shrugged versus Pity of War. You take Pity of War.
Pity of War, yeah, okay. Ferguson for the win, okay. That's not to say David Friedman or Ayn Rand are slouches. It's just they don't quite make the cut.
Now the other eccentrics, which is his own category. Christopher Hitchens versus Ferguson. Hitchens is more of a polemic. His New Atheist stuff won't be remembered. I think what will be remembered about Christopher Hitchens is his really early stuff and his neocon days. Those are the two things that will be remembered about Christopher Hitchens. Because his book, I think it's Class Conflict or something about the I forget the precise name. That was really good, I remember. His New Atheist stuff is boring. And he'll remember his late years for being sort of like a advocate of the Iraq War and advocate of his buddy Sam Harris got sort of banned, is hated by a lot of Marxists for being counter Muslim immigration as well. So I think Christopher Hitchens versus Ferguson.
Even if we leave out the New Atheist phase, Hitchens was at best a hack. Hitchens really had no new ideas. He wasn't a great expositor of old ideas. He just was a moderately successful writer for Salon magazine who knew the right people. Niall Ferguson really is doing something creative and new and is a very serious scholar.
Ferguson versus Diamond.
Ferguson. Diamond's a joke.
Well, this will be interesting. Ferguson versus Zizek.
Hmm. I don't really know what Zizek wrote. That's kind of putting me on the back foot here.
Social influence, then. Um, Neil Ferguson versus Slavoj Zizek. Slavoj Zizek has a huge influence on right and left. That's one of the incredible things about Zizek.
I
And
think
yet,
Zizek is probably going to win. I just don't know which one of his. I don't know what books he's written.
in 100, okay, let's try it this way. 100 years from now, who's the more likely um, person that you have any influence and chance of remembering? A lot of people just get forgotten, of course, but like
Mhm.
Keith Preston just had an article about William Godwin. I mean, he's fairly obscure, for example. Who's going to be the more obscure one in 100 years? I think that would have to go to Zizek, unfortunately, because I think Ferguson might. I don't know.
Well, you see, okay, Ferguson would probably be remembered 100 years from now, not as an extremely well-known popular figure, but kind of like in the same way that people remember Mises within the context of going deep down the libertarian rabbit hole. If you're deep into the World War I historiography rabbit hole,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they're going to remember Niall Ferguson.
Yeah.
Maybe even the history of money as well. But that's a very, arcane, specialized discipline that outside of, you probably won't be well known.
We'll give it to Zizek because I think
Yeah.
Ferguson versus Nassim Taleb. They actually been in a few public debates together. There's a fairly famous debate where him and I think the CEO of Microsoft and some PepsiCo CEO, which has like 400,000 views. That's actually the first time I heard of Nassim Taleb, by the way. Um, and Taleb and Ferguson are actually friends, by the way. So Taleb versus Ferguson, who would you rather?
Well, I would prefer Ferguson, but I think Taleb might win because his sociological work is so influential.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anti-fragility's gone viral.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Uh,
in a way that even though Ferguson tried to go viral with the idea of culture and killer apps, it just didn't work the same way anti-fragility caught on.
mm-hmm. uh, Graham Hancock and Thad Russell versus Ferguson. I think you have to take Ferguson.
Yeah, Ferguson.
That's not easy. Now, Ferguson versus the Social Conservatives. I'll start with your buddy Pat Buchanan. Who would you take? Now, again, you like Pat Buchanan a lot, so it's going to be tough. But I don't think Pat Buchanan's influence. But for you, Pat Buchanan probably has a larger influence. So if this is for you, which is it's 75% you, this list. Um,
Well, I mean, yeah, Pat Buchanan is going to have more of an influence on me. And but overall, who will be remembered more, Pat Buchanan or? I mean, because I don't mean to sound harsh. I mean, after all, I do like Pat, but he's just going to be remembered as the politician who failed to be president 3 times, 92, 96, and 2000. If he's remembered, that's what he's going to be remembered for. If somebody remembers Niall Ferguson, they're going to remember a creative intellectual who reinvigorated the stale historiography of World War One.
okay, so you take Ferguson?
I think so.
Uh, Now again, some of these comparisons are sort of apples and oranges, but that's part of the fun of these lists itself. But Ferguson versus Gottfried.
I guess it kind of depends on how successful the alt-right becomes.
Yeah, that's true.
Because if again, right now it looks like the alt-right's in the tank.
An autopsy.
But then again, all it takes is a couple charismatic leaders of the right kind to totally turn a dead movement around.
Yeah, Paul Gottfried in that way is not like, Marx or Hegel. I mean, Marx's reputation is built on the success or failure of whether it's social democracy or whatever. And the same way to a certain extent with Rothbard as well. But so you're gonna take Ferguson over Gottfried?
Probably. I mean, depends on how, again, if the alt-right were somehow turn it around to reach Marxist level of awareness, then yeah, I'd go to Paul. But I don't see that happening in the short term or even the long term. But then again, I could be wrong. So
Coulter and Hitchens. I think you have to take Ferguson. I mean,
yeah, Ferguson.
I included some throwaways just for interest, but Noam Chomsky versus Ferguson.
Yikes! I think unfortunately it's going to go to Noam.
Wow, Mr.
The
Chomsky.
reason why it goes to Noam Chomsky is because, like, literally the entire left is a footnote to Noam Chomsky. Like, all left-wing rhetoric on U.S. imperialism, on corporate exploitation, on the news cycle, it all comes from Noam Chomsky. Like, he's so freaking influential, it's crazy.
Yeah, in the early days of YouTube, if you searched for political videos, you'd almost guaranteed to hit on the top three results a Noam Chomsky video of Noam Chomsky talking about U.S. foreign policy or whatever. And it's funny, you know, until he started endorsing Hillary Clinton, Noam Chomsky had a thing about he went through all the U.S. presidents, including ones like FDR and Wilson and Lincoln, and called them all war criminals, which is, which considering his platform, that's kind of surprising. But okay, Ferguson versus Pipes. Two. Now this is more of an apples to apples comparison. Um, the Pipes has the property book, and as well as the two books on Russia. Um,
I think it's going to go to Pipes. The reason why is Pipes has transformed Russian history from an Anglosphere. Okay, within the Anglosphere, Richard Pipes has had a much greater influence on Russian historiography than I think Niall Ferguson has had on World War One, because technically his revisionist history on World War One is not new. They were people that were saying this in the 20s and 30s. They were people saying this after World War II.
mm-hmm.
They just were suppressed. What Niall Ferguson was able to do was to bring these arguments to the forefront within a mainstream context, whereas Richard Pipes is, I think, doing something genuinely new and is highly influential at it as well.
Right, that thing is up that one. So next we'll do Noam Chomsky versus all the libertarians. So Noam Chomsky versus we've done Rothbard, and in that regard you chose I think you chose yes, you did chose Rothbard. But so Noam Chomsky versus the rest of the libertarians. So we have David Friedman, Hoppe, and so forth.
Well, as far as influence, Chomsky beats them all. I mean, literally, it's just, I don't know how you beat Chomsky. I mean, like I said, the entire left-wing political spectrum of the Anglosphere is a footnote to Noam Chomsky. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's crazy.
Including Ayn Rand, you say she beat.
Whoa! Oh, good point. Good point.
Because Atlas Shrugged, whether the left likes it or not, and actually whether some social conservatives like it or not, Atlas Shrugged remains, one of the top 10 books probably of the last century.
That's actually a good point. Yes, with the exception of Ayn Rand, I think he blows out as far as influence all the other.
For consistency, you picked Rothbard over Chomsky in the previous list. Would you still stand by that?
On which point? Influence?
Yeah, you picked. No, you picked all around. You said you picked Rothbard on the about.
Yeah, I picked Rothbard on the fact that I agree with him more and the fact that I would probably enjoy hanging out with him more. But on influence, I would say Noam Chomsky is more influential than Rothbard.
So what would break the tie there?
Well, we're comparing them on three different categories: conviviality, social agreement, and
there's only one. You have to make a choice. It's not you can't just take the whole fork.
Well, then, I mean, it's going to have to be Chomsky because he's so influential.
So Chomsky beats all the libertarians, including Rand?
No, Rand is a tie. I forgot about Rand.
Okay. So
because again, in the same way that Noam Chomsky, all left-wing ideology is a footnote to Noam Chomsky. Modern-day conservative ideology is a footnote to Ayn Rand. So I'm guessing, those two guys. That's an apples-to-apples comparison, actually.
Chomsky versus Rand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Chomsky versus the social conservatives. I mean, again, this might not be an apples-to-apples comp, but so we'll start with Gottfried.
I
mean, it would probably have to be Chomsky because of influence. Now, see, I'm not entirely. I'm not a Chomsky hater. I don't think I ever was a Chomsky hater. I don't think you yourself are a pure Chomsky hater yourself. I could be wrong. I mean, that's fine, but
No, I'm not a pure hater.
I mean, he says interesting things about the U.S. foreign policy. I have no clue what his work on linguistics is, but so Gottfried versus Chomsky, who would you take?
Well, I mean, again, when it comes to influence, I think Chomsky pretty much beats, unfortunately, all the social conservatives, except maybe Victor Davis Hanson. Victor
Okay.
Davis Hanson is more of an apples to apples. He's been extremely influential in formulating right-wing thinking in the Anglosphere. So I'd say he probably ties with Hanson as far as significance.
But again, that significance with Chomsky is always more. Uh, it could be bad significance in your book too.
Yeah,
So
I'm just
so
making a more clinical judgment.
so okay. So in clinical terms, it has to be Chomsky, except Hansen. Then it's
Yeah,
maybe a tie. All
yeah.
right, and then Chomsky versus Pipes and Moldbug.
Oh, well, Pipes is probably a tie too.
Tie. Okay.
Moldbug, he loses hard. Uh,
He just hasn't won a single one. So okay, and Chomsky versus Taleb, Ferguson, Diamond. Three other intellectuals.
ooh. I think we already did Niall Ferguson. No, we didn't. Not with Chomsky.
No, we haven't done Chomsky versus Ferguson.
Chomsky probably wins, unfortunately, against Ferguson. Taleb, ooh. I'm going to go with a tie. I mean, anti-fragility is pretty influential social theory. It's everybody's name dropping Taleb now, so
Yes.
I'm going to say a tie as far as significance. And who was the other one? You had three.
Jared Diamond, your buddy.
Dang, that's also probably a tie. I mean, literally.
Guns, Germs, and Steel. Whatever you think of the thesis in the book, it's one of those books that just circulates out there in the culture. You know.
Literally every single left-wing outlet that explains why white people are better than everyone else appeals to geography. They're appealing to Jared Diamond.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So now this actually happened in real life. Chomsky versus Zizek. I would argue Zizek won the Chomsky versus
Oh yeah,
Zizek
hands
spat.
down, man. My man Zizek.
Um,
No one's been more empirically wrong in his life than Noam Chomsky. I love that line.
that was like the dumbest. That was Chomsky versus Thad Russell. I think I could just drop Thad Russell. You don't seem to like Thad Russell, but
Well, Chomsky.
and Chomsky versus Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens, of course, not Peter Hitchens.
Yeah, probably Chomsky.
Okay, so that includes the Chomsky domination period. So now,
I mean, it's not that I like Chomsky. He's just such a dominating personality. I mean,
so we're gonna do Jared Diamond next. So Jared Diamond versus the Libertarians. So Jared Diamond.
oh my gosh. I mean,
again, the Guns, Germs, and Steel is one of those books. I mean, I don't know what Guns, Germs, and Steel will just be thrown out of libraries in 200 years. It'll just be forgotten. If the alt-right ever takes over, it probably will.
yes.
Well,
okay, let me put it this way. When it comes to influence, only Ayn Rand is even in the same running as far as being an influential thinker.
and Ferguson.
No, we're talking about libertarians.
Oh, of the libertarians, yeah.
Oh, and of course, David Friedman. David and Rand are the only comparatively influential people. As far as who do I like more, almost all the libertarians beat Chomsky on conviviality and ideas that I agree with. I mean, Chomsky's kind of nuts. Like, the Republicans are worse than Hitler. Like, okay, dude.
But again, Jared Diamond versus all the libertarians. What was your answer then? Diamond? Or David Friedman versus Jared Diamond?
Okay. When it comes to influence, only Ayn Rand and David Friedman tie with.
Sorry.
Yeah. But when it comes to, as a person, everybody beats him.
Yeah. So as personhood points, Jared Diamond gets very low personhood. So,
Everybody
uh,
beats Jared. Um, but when it comes to influence, only Ayn Rand could even think of beating him, and David probably ties.
what about Murray? I know we've done it again, but yeah, we did Murray Rothbard again. Sorry, repeating it myself. Okay, so um, Jared Diamond versus the other social conservatives. So Paul Gottfried, Peter Hitchens, Pat Buchanan.
Well, obviously Victor Davis Hanson, and they did debate, our
Yes,
sparring partners.
and I'd say
Both,
Hansen won that debate.
yes, he won handily. So Hanson lays down the hurt on on Jared Diamond, but okay. As far as influence, only Victor Davis Hanson uh, compares to Jared Diamond. As far as who I'd want to have, lunch with, everybody beats him out.
Yeah, what about Paul Gottfried versus Victor David Hansen, Jared Diamond? I mean, on influence, it's clear. Although on influence, it becomes a more of a game of what kind of influence you have. Because again, Paul Gottfried is probably one of the more influential intellectuals of the alt right. And again, I mean, I wouldn't call myself per se that, but it is a movement, and it may be dead movement. But what would you say is the
Hmm.
influence game between the two? Because what kind of influence does Jared Diamond really actually have? Um, um,
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, his book is widely cited, but did he really change any minds? I think the
People
reason
already
why
agree with this thesis. It's just a.
the reason why Guns, Germs, and Steel is so popular is Jared Diamond wrote the definitive defense of geographic determinism. And since the left, because it believes everybody's fungible, has to ipso
Has
facto
to,
accept
yeah.
geographic determinism, he is literally the best advocate for the only position they're allowed to hold. And that's it. Um, Paul Gottfried probably is a better intellectual, but nobody listens to him.
Yeah, he's a taboo intellectual in a way that Jared Diamond is not.
Hmm.
Um, and then I don't think there's Peter
Actually,
Hitchens. I mean,
Tim,
what?
you forgot my boy Charles Murray. What's going on here?
I did forget Charles Murray. Too
How did
late
you
now.
forget Charles Murray, dude?
Forgot. I find Murray to be kind of boring, but that's all right. Chomsky versus Diamond. Chomsky.
Yikes. Chomsky wins, actually, on all points. I think I'd rather hang out with Chomsky than Diamond.
Okay. So and lastly, Chomsky versus the other eccentric sort of type figures: Taleb, Hancock, Ferguson, Zizek, and
Okay,
so forth.
as far as eclectic thinkers, eccentric rather, I think Taleb and Ferguson probably, as far as influence, are comparable to Chomsky.
Hmm.
Because again, it's not just on World War One that Ferguson is influential. He's written the history of money. He's written the official biography of the Rothschilds. He's definitely a very influential thinker.
Hmm.
Um, and so is Nassim Taleb. Um, and so I'd say they're all three roughly tied as far as influence goes. And when it comes to who I want to
You
hang
take
out with,
the Taleb, Zizek, and all those over. So it's pretty clear cut the board. Everyone beats Jared Diamond, except right.
yeah.
Okay. Um. All right. So including Christopher Hitchens,
Oh,
Hitchens versus Zizek.
oh,
Not Hitchens versus Zizek. Hitchens versus
oh. Diamond might win that matchup.
Yeah, because again, everyone's gonna forget the new atheist stuff. I mean, it's just you know. So okay. So Diamond beats a lot of people. He has a sort of 50-50 reputation. So okay, we're gonna go. We're gonna pull out. We're gonna pull out. We're gonna pull out Moldbug. You've been skirting around him.
Well, hold on, Tim. Bonus round, Charles Murray, right?
Yeah, sure. But first we'll do the unqualified reservations guy. Um, um, you don't like this guy. Well, whatever term you want to use. You don't agree with him. Um, um, so Moldbug versus the Libertarians.
Okay, pretty much every libertarian beats Moldbug.
Okay.
And the reason is simple. The libertarians, even if I think they're wrong, have a sophisticated first principles philosophy. Once you understand the philosophical framework of libertarianism, you can begin to deduce the answers they're going to give you. Whereas Moldbug is just pulling it out of his backside. You never know what he's going to say next. And half of what he says is just there to trigger people. Whereas the libertarians, once you understand the NAP or the market, whatever, you can then begin to deduce what they're going to say. It's a rational system. It's a rational framework that you may or may not agree with. Moldbug doesn't even have a framework. It's just this. It's
a military
mood.
coup guy.
What?
He's a military coup guy, actually, which is, I mean, he sort of buys in the Triple H mindset as well.
Well, in this regard, Moldbug is it's a mood. Right? Libertarians have a theory. Moldbug has a mood.
Yeah. All right. So Moldbug loses to. Does Moldbug lose to everybody?
No, not quite.
So yeah. No, we could just do this on one. It's like one party.
Well, okay. As I said, Moldbug loses to every libertarian. If we go to the eccentric thinkers, the only people Moldbug does not lose to are Christopher Hitchens and Jared Diamond.
Okay, so you take Moldbug over Jared Diamond.
I think Jared Diamond's more influential, but I think one of the things
who would you rather have for lunch with, Jared Diamond or Moldbug?
Moldbug.
Oh, okay.
I can't see. What's interesting is a lot of these Jewish intellectuals, at least on the right or the libertarians, they tend to be able to have a joke at their own expense. They tend to understand that they're not God's greatest gift to the world, whereas a lot of these intellectuals think that they were born without original sin and they came here to save us. And I'm like, hit the road. Get out of here.
Okay, so Moldbug beats everyone but Jared Diamond and Christopher Hitchens. That's the only people he wins against. He loses.
Yes. He does beat those two. Okay. Social conservatives, he loses to everyone.
Sans Diamond and Hitchens. That's all right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now we'll do Zizek. Slavoj Zizek, Mr. Zizek. Debated Jordan Peterson. He's been very influential on the internet. Again,
how did you forget Jordan Peterson?
I did forget Jordan Peterson, but I've always found Peterson to be kind of lame, so I just didn't include him. Same with Charles Murray. But
Wait. Peterson's lame, but Moldbug isn't?
Peterson's mainstream, though. That's not... I'm not... But anyway, Zizek versus the Libertarians. Are you going to take Zizek over everyone?
No. David and Zizek are probably tied.
So David and Zizek are tied.
And Rand. Rand would not be a pleasant person to have lunch with, though.
You'd have to smoke. You can only listen to one type of music. No,
I don't know. I mean, it's with Zizek, it's interesting, right? Because when it comes to him and the libertarians, what I agree with him on, I would probably disagree with libertarians on. But what I agree with them on, I would disagree with him on. So it's not quite apples to apples. He's like one of the most entertaining guys to talk to. His, Jordan Peterson, band jam session was amazing. And him throwing shade at Chomsky was amazing. So he's pretty high on the list. But I would say Friedman and Rand. The others, I mean, I don't know. He probably beats everybody but them.
Okay. And the Centrics, so obviously he beats Chomsky. Well, he's in the other category. But obviously he beats Chomsky. But of the eccentrics, Nassim Taleb, Ferguson,
Diamond. I mean, again, if we look at influence, he may not be the most influential in these categories. But on a subjective, personal level, yep, Taleb, I'm going to go with not Ferguson. Why did I say that?
The Taleb, you're gonna go with Zizek.
Yes.
Taleb.
Ferguson or dude, I don't know. I mean, that's either one would be a pretty awesome
So one question: Zizek versus Taleb. Who would you rather?
Zizek.
Zizek versus Ferguson.
I don't know. It'd be really good either way. I feel like I need to have that meme with that little Latina girl. Why not both?
There's no choice is the problem here.
Ah,
Make a choice.
if I had to pick, I'd probably pick Ferguson. But
Okay.
they're both really cool.
Ferguson versus Zizek versus Diamond.
Zizek, hands down.
Zizek versus Christopher Hitchens.
Zizek, hands down.
Zizek versus all the socialist conservatives.
Yikes. If he beats any of them, it would probably be Hansen. I don't think Hansen would be very fun to hang out with. He'd probably just be calling me a Nazi the whole time. Which I know Zizek wouldn't do that. So I think Zizek would probably.
The funny thing is, Zizek gets called that himself.
I know, which is why he wouldn't do it.
Yeah, that's the real hilarity in this whole situation. Okay, so you take Zizek over Coulter, Gottfried, Hitchens, and Buchanan?
No. The only person that Zizek straights up, I think I'd take over would be Hansen.
Okay, so not Zizek. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. And lastly, actually, I think we've done. I would assume you'd take Zizek over Chomsky, Pipes, and Moldbug, right? You've already done that with Moldbug.
Yeah.
You've already done that with Pipes. Pipes. I think you just sort of have to take him over Pipes. He's more of an obscure intellectual. All right, we'll add a bonus round in here too. Jordan Peterson versus the Libertarians. What will be Jordan Peterson's legacy? Will he be forgotten? I mean, some people compare him to Ayn Rand. I think that's a weak comparison.
No, I think Jordan Peterson will. See, he's not famous for doing any great intellectual work. He's famous because of the pronoun scandal in Canada.
And then he sort of built an online audience with that.
Yeah. So I don't think he'll be remembered. I really think a better candidate for the bonus round would be Charles Murray.
Okay.
Charles Murray will be remembered. The bell curve is very influential, as is, I think, Coming Apart.
Mm-hmm. Even people on the left and sort of social democrats will cite Charles Murray occasionally.
His influence,
begrudgingly, of course, but
his influence is huge. Charles Murray blows out all the libertarians, but Rand and Friedman, as usual. Rand and Friedman would still be at the top of the list and would give a good running. When it comes to social conservatives, I think Charles Murray is kind of a social conservative, but he would probably beat everyone in the social conservative category except maybe Hansen, because Hansen is very influential too.
And then of the intellectuals, Murray versus Taleb, Murray versus Ferguson, Murray versus Diamond.
Dang, Murray's like the top dog in that category, man. The bell curve is what created the alt-right, dude. I mean, no, he didn't intend to do that, but the bell curve is probably one of the most influential works of sociology ever.
Okay, so would Murray beat Zizek then, if that's the case, or is Zizek not really a true lefty in that regard because he doesn't?
I think Charles Murray would win against Zizek. Yeah, I think so.
Wow. So Murray beats the field almost everyone except Rand, Hansen, and Friedman, correct?
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow.
And Pipes. Pipes. Right? I can't forget Pipes.
What about Chomsky? I think we've done this already, but yeah, of course.
Well, okay. On as far as an influence level, they're probably tied, but I prefer Charles, so Charles wins. But yeah, Chomsky's in the running, certainly.
We'll we'll throw one or two more in, and then we'll call it quits here. We haven't done Ayn Rand versus everybody.
That ought to be fun.
So Ayn Rand versus the other libertarians. Now, of
only,
course,
only
Rand is
David.
not.
Only David.
So only David. So Rand versus the intellectuals, the eccentrics people. Rand versus Taleb, Rand versus Ferguson. Rand
Okay,
versus
Taleb, Ferguson, Zizek. They would be the only, and Diamond, begrudgingly. Those four would be on par with Rand.
On par or beating?
To be honest, I'm not sure any of them could beat Rand. I mean, her popularity. I mean, people like to credit Rothbard or Mises for driving the libertarian movement, but it's really Rand. Everybody gets started reading Atlas Shrugged and what's the other book she did? Fountainhead.
On influence, who do you think has more influence? Ron Paul, the presidential candidate, or Ayn Rand, the author?
Ayn Rand, the author.
Wow, that's because Ron Paul running for president is probably one of the more influential events for the paleo libertarians and libertarians.
But now they're gone.
Yeah, they're gone. So Ayn Rand versus Chomsky.
That's about a tie.
Tie? Why so?
Because in their own political ecosystems, they're equally influential. And as of yet, neither one has won a knockout blow in the Anglosphere.
And what did you give an answer for Zizek? I might have just didn't write it down.
I don't think we covered Zizek. Rand's gonna win.
And why so? Influence better.
Influence is what's going to carry her over. I mean, I'd rather have lunch with Zizek, but Ayn Rand's probably going to win.
Okay, so last but not least, we'll do Christopher Hitchens, and we'll wrap it up.
He loses to everyone.
Yes, but we have to go through it. We have to do it. Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens versus
the only person lower than Moldbug is Hitchens on this list.
Why?
Because not only Moldbug is trying to have an original idea, Hitchens isn't even trying. I mean, it's better to try and fail than to not try at all.
So it's going to take me a bit to tally up all the information, but it appears that the top three candidates are Chomsky, Rand. Top four candidates are Chomsky, Rand, Zizek, and Ferguson. Does that surprise you?
No. Because again, part of it's subjective, but part of it's also being clinical and accurately evaluating these people's influences.
Mm-hmm. I forgot. Hans Hoppe. I'd sort of like you to do through Hans Hoppe's influence versus vis-a-vis everybody else. You've already picked Rothbard as over Hoppe, but you haven't picked Hoppe versus over like the social.
The only person Hoppe beats is Sean Gabb and the Libertarians.
Okay.
Okay, hold on. When it comes to influence, he's second tier. So top tier is David Friedman and Ayn Rand. Second tier is Rothbard. Third tier is Hoppe. Well, Hoppe's almost second tier. He probably is. Yeah, he's second tier with Rothbard. But as far as someone who I want to have lunch with and would want to talk to, probably everybody else but Sean Gabb.
You don't think the PFS will have a long-running influence? Or do you think the PFS is anything close to the Montpelier Society with Hayek?
No.
Because on your podcast yesterday, you said that Keith Preston made the point that the neoliberal revolution was pioneered in the 30s and 40s by guys like Hayek, and to a certain extent,
Milton Friedman.
You don't think Hoppe could have a similar influence on Austrian economics?
It's theoretically possible, but I don't think so.
Okay, and then does Hoppe beat any of the social conservatives? Does Hoppe beat Pat Buchanan, for example? That's an interesting one.
No. You see, here's another problem with Hoppe as far as making these judgments, is he's extremely influential within libertarian circles.
but no
But
one.
how
Yeah,
big are libertarian circles? And outside of libertarian circles, he's pretty much unheard of.
yeah, and libertarians are small to begin with, and if you go to Reason Magazine forums or comment sections, and you drop Hoppe, no one's going to hear of him, for example. If you go to the C4SS type things, no one's going to hear of Hoppe, most likely. Would you agree with both?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. He's just not that influential. Murray's way more influential than Hoppe.
and, Gary Johnson only barely knew of Murray Rothbard, so there's no chance that Gary Johnson would have heard of Hans Hoppe.
But they all knew about Ayn Rand now, don't they?
That's true. That's true. That's Ayn Rand trumps all the libertarians.
How many of them know about David Friedman? Most of them, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly. That's why David and Ayn are at the top.
yeah. Alrighty. Well, this has been interesting. Learn more things about your views, comparison in the intellectual world there. So, alrighty.
All right. Well, this is Todd Lewis of the Prayers of Folly podcast signing off.